Step out of the vehicle now.
Officer, I provided my license. What is the reason for this
I
stop?
said step out. Don't argue with me.
I'm not resisting. I'm asking a lawful question.
Hands on the hood. Do it.
I do not consent to any searches.
You don't decide that.
Blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon. On a day that was supposed to be just another normal Tuesday, Judge Barbara Taylor had just finished lunch with her coworkers and was driving back to the courthouse when Officer Marcus Wright decided to pull her over. What happened next would uncover a corrupt police officer, ruin a career built on abusing power, and lead to one of the biggest civil rights settlements in the state's history. But before we get into this unbelievable story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because the way this case unfolds will seriously shock you. Judge Barbara Taylor had served 15 years on the federal bench. She was well respected, highly accomplished, and known for being fair but strict when it came to justice. At 52 years old, she had handled thousands of cases, ranging from corporate fraud to violent crimes. She lived a quiet life, drove a simple sedan, and stayed in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. In her entire adult life, she had never even received a speeding ticket. That Tuesday afternoon, she was dressed in her usual professional clothes underneath her judicial robe, which she had taken off during her lunch break. There was absolutely nothing unusual about her driving. She was going 5 miles under the speed limit, used her turn signals, and followed every traffic law. Nothing she did gave any reason to be pulled over, but to Officer Wright, none of that mattered. Marcus Wright had been on the police force for 8 years. On paper, he looked like a solid officer. He had good performance reviews and even received commendation. But what his supervisors didn't know, or maybe chose not to see, was that Wright had developed a disturbing habit. He often targeted successful black professionals, especially those who clearly had accomplished more than he ever had. He seemed to enjoy embarrassing and intimidating them. When Wright spotted Judge Taylor driving through downtown, something set him off. Maybe it was her confident posture, maybe her professional look, or maybe it was simply the fact that she was a successful black woman. Whatever the reason, Wright made a choice in that moment, a choice that would come back to destroy his life. At first, the traffic stop seemed normal. Wright walked up to the driver's side window with his hand resting on his gun. That alone immediately caught Judge Taylor's attention. She had spent years in courtrooms and knew the difference between an officer doing their job and one looking for trouble. His posture felt aggressive and completely unnecessary. Wright asked for her license and registration, but didn't explain why she had been stopped. Judge Taylor calmly handed over the documents and politely asked what traffic law she had violated. Wright ignored her question, turned around, and walked back to his patrol car. He left her sitting there for almost 20 minutes. During that time, Wright ran her information through every database he had access to. He was searching for anything outstanding: warrants, unpaid tickets, a suspended license, anything that would give him a reason to escalate the situation. He wanted leverage over this woman who clearly believed she was above him. But Judge Taylor's record was completely clean. No warrants, no unpaid fines, no violations at all. Her license was valid, her registration was current, and her insurance was up to date. Wright was angry and frustrated, but he wasn't ready to back down. When he returned to her car, his attitude had changed. He was more hostile and confrontational. He ordered her to step out of the vehicle. Judge Taylor calmly asked why, reminding him that she had already provided everything he requested and hadn't broken any laws. Wright raised his voice and repeated the order. Judge Taylor complied, but she also did something very important. Her phone was still sitting in the cup holder, and she quietly turned on the voice recorder. From that moment on, everything that happened was recorded with clear audio. Wright told her to place her hands on the hood of the car. Once again, she asked what violation had led to the stop. This time, Wright snapped and told her to shut up and do what she was told. His language and tone became more aggressive and completely unprofessional. Then Wright made his first serious mistake. He started searching her purse without consent and without probable cause. Judge Taylor clearly stated that she did not agree to any searches and asked to see a warrant. Wright laughed and said he didn't need her permission or a warrant. As he went through her belongings, he came across her judicial identification card. Most officers would have realized immediately that they had made a huge mistake. They would have apologized and ended the stop, but not Wright. Instead, he accused her of having a fake ID and claimed she was pretending to be a federal judge. Judge Taylor stayed calm and explained that she was in fact a sitting federal judge. She suggested that he contact the courthouse to confirm her identity. Wright's response showed exactly who he was. He said he didn't care if she was the President of the United States. she was going to learn some respect. Quick question for you watching: have you ever seen police misconduct in real life? If you have, type yes in the comments. Wright then handcuffed Judge Taylor and placed her in the back of his patrol car. Even as her constitutional rights were being violated in broad daylight, she stayed calm and professional. She asked to speak to a supervisor and was told to shut her mouth. What Wright didn't understand was that Judge Taylor had an excellent memory for legal rules and constitutional law. Every illegal action, every violation, and every inappropriate comment was being carefully recorded in her mind for the lawsuit she was already planning. The arrest had no legal basis at all. Wright claimed she was driving erratically, but dash cam footage would later prove that was a lie. He said she was aggressive and uncooperative, but the audio recording showed she was polite and compliant the entire time. He even claimed she resisted arrest, yet witnesses who saw everything would later confirm she never resisted in any way. Wright took Judge Taylor to the county jail, where the situation became even more humiliating. He told the intake officers that she was a career criminal pretending to be a federal judge. He pushed for extra charges like identity theft and fraud on top of the fake traffic violations he had already made up. But the intake officers were experienced and competent. They immediately sensed something wasn't right. Judge Taylor didn't act like a criminal. The way she spoke, her calm behavior, and her deep understanding of legal procedures all pointed to one thing: she was exactly who she said she was. While Wright was busy filling out paperwork, one of the intake officers quietly contacted the federal courthouse. Within 30 minutes, they confirmed that Judge Barbara Taylor was indeed a sitting federal judge and that she was expected back in court that same afternoon for a sentencing hearing. The jail supervisor, a veteran officer with 25 years of experience, instantly understood how serious this was. A police officer had illegally arrested a federal judge using made-up charges. This wasn't just misconduct, it was career-ending. The supervisor tried to keep things quiet. He pulled Wright aside and suggested they release Judge Taylor immediately and pretend the whole incident never happened. But Wright, driven by either extreme arrogance or complete stupidity, refused. He doubled down, insisting she was a criminal, and demanded that they finish processing her. That was the moment the jail supervisor made a decision that would end Wright's career for good. He immediately contacted the police chief, the district attorney, and the local FBI field office. Within less than an hour, the jail was flooded with investigators, internal affairs officers, and federal agents. Judge Taylor was released right away and given repeated apologies by nearly everyone involved, everyone except Wright. He continued to claim he had done nothing wrong. Judge Taylor was offered medical care, counseling, and any support she might need. She calmly declined and instead asked for copies of all reports, videos, and audio recordings connected to her arrest. What followed would make Wright regret ever becoming a police officer. Within hours, the FBI opened a civil rights investigation. The police department launched an internal affairs probe. The district attorney began reviewing every single case Wright had ever touched. At the same time, Judge Taylor hired the best civil rights attorney in the state. The evidence against Wright was crushing. Dash cam footage clearly showed Judge Taylor driving normally and obeying all traffic laws. The audio recording captured every illegal move and inappropriate comment Wright made. Multiple witnesses confirmed that she was calm, respectful, and fully cooperative the entire time. But investigators soon uncovered something even worse. Wright had a clear pattern of targeting successful black professionals. Over the past 3 years, he had made dozens of questionable arrests, nearly all involving black doctors, lawyers, business owners, and other professionals. Department records showed that Wright arrested black drivers at 5 times the rate of white drivers, even though he worked the same areas and shifts as other officers. Many of his arrest reports were inaccurate or completely made up. Complaints filed against him had been ignored or quietly dismissed without real investigation. Internal Affairs also discovered that Wright had bragged to fellow officers about putting uppity people in their place. He had made racist comments in the locker room and even kept a personal scorecard tracking how many people in suits he had humiliated. The deeper investigators dug, the worse things became not just for Wright, but for the entire department. They uncovered evidence that supervisors had covered up complaints, proof of discriminatory practices, and a culture that didn't just allow racism but encouraged it. Judge Taylor's arrest became the centerpiece of a massive federal civil rights investigation. In the end, it led to a consent decree that placed the entire police department under federal oversight for the next 10 years. But for Wright, things were only getting worse. The illegal arrest of a federal judge attracted national media attention. Wright's face was suddenly everywhere on TV, online, and in newspapers across the country. Civil rights lawyers from all over the nation began reaching out to Judge Taylor, offering to represent her for free. She chose Angelique Martinez, a legendary civil rights attorney known for winning over $200 million in settlements from police departments nationwide. Martinez was famous for her brutal courtroom questioning and her ability to expose deep-rooted corruption in law enforcement. 3 months later, the lawsuit was filed, and it was a legal masterpiece. It didn't just go after Wright for his actions. It targeted the entire police department for creating and protecting a system of racial discrimination. The lawsuit named Wright, his supervisor, the police chief, and the city itself as defendants. The complaint laid out Wright's behavior in shocking detail. Martinez had interviewed 43 people who had been illegally stopped, searched, or arrested by Wright over the past 5 years. Their stories followed the same pattern almost every time. Successful black men and women driving through downtown areas were pulled over for fake violations, subjected to humiliating searches, and often arrested on charges that were later quietly dropped. Michael Stevens, a well-known surgeon, described how Wright pulled him over while he was rushing to perform emergency surgery. Wright forced him to stand in the rain for over an hour while his BMW was searched. Dr. Stevens missed the surgery, and a patient's life may have been put at risk. Attorney Sarah Johnson told how Wright arrested her in front of her children. After she questioned why he was searching her car during a routine stop, she spent 6 hours in jail before the charges were suddenly dropped without explanation. Business owner David Chin explained how Wright handcuffed him outside his own restaurant, claiming he looked suspicious walking around the building. In reality, Chen had been checking on his property after hours, something he had done every night for 15 years. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Martinez used these stories to build a case that was nearly impossible to fight, not just against Wright, but against the system that had protected him for years. Wright's legal defense fell apart almost immediately. His lawyer tried to argue that Wright had followed proper procedures and that Judge Taylor had been uncooperative. That argument collapsed within minutes when Martinez played the full audio recording for the jury. They heard Wright say he did take care if she was the President of the United States. They heard him search her belongings without consent. They heard him make degrading comments about putting her in her place. They heard him fabricate charges and lie to jail staff. By the time the recording ended, the jury did just understand what happened. They felt it. Wright's lawyer then tried a new strategy. He claimed the arrest was an honest mistake and argued that Wright truly believed Judge Taylor was pretending to be a federal judge. But that argument fell apart almost immediately. Martinez presented proof showing that Wright had access to multiple police databases that could have confirmed Judge Taylor's identity in minutes. There was no excuse for what he did. Still, Martinez wasn't done. She didn't just want to prove that Wright was guilty. She wanted to expose the entire broken system that had allowed him to abuse his power for years without consequences. During the discovery phase, Martinez uncovered internal emails that were extremely damaging. These messages showed that Wright's supervisors knew about the complaints against him but chose to ignore them. One email from Wright's sergeant said, "Wright knows how to handle the troublemakers in our district. Sometimes you have to show these people who's in charge." Another email from a lieutenant discussed moving Wright to areas with more activity, which investigators understood as code for neighborhoods with larger black populations. The department's own training records made things even worse. Wright had been reprimanded several times for using excessive force and making improper arrests, yet he was never seriously disciplined. His personnel file contained 19 citizen complaints, all dismissed without proper investigation. Martinez also uncovered an unofficial quota system within the department. Officers were rewarded for making arrests in certain neighborhoods. Wright consistently led the department in arrest numbers, which earned him praise from supervisors who cared more about statistics than people's constitutional rights. The trial lasted 6 weeks and quickly became a national media event. Every day, the courthouse was packed with reporters, civil rights activists, and community members who wanted to see justice served. Judge Taylor testified for 2 full days. She calmly and clearly explained how Wright had violated her rights and publicly humiliated her. Speaking in the same steady tone she used in court as a judge, she carefully walked the jury through every illegal action Wright took. She explained how his behavior violated the 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendments. She also spoke about the emotional trauma of being handcuffed and jailed like a criminal even though she had done nothing wrong. One of the most powerful parts of her testimony was when she spoke about the larger impact of Wright's actions. She explained how his behavior damaged public trust in law enforcement and made it harder for honest officers to do their jobs. She also explained how his actions sent a clear message to the black community that success, education, and professionalism offered no protection from police harassment. When Wright took the stand in his own defense, it was a complete disaster. Under Martinez's questioning, he contradicted himself again and again. He couldn't explain why he stopped Judge Taylor in the first place. He couldn't justify searching her belongings without consent. He had no evidence to support the charges he filed against her. When Martinez asked about his pattern of targeting black professionals, Wright became defensive and angry. He denied being racist, yet at the same time made comments that revealed what he truly believed about successful black people. The most damaging moment came when Martinez played a recording from Wright's own body camera during an earlier arrest. In the audio, Wright could be heard saying, "These people think their fancy degrees make them better than us. I'll show them who really has the power." As the recording played, Wright's face turned pale. His attorney objected, but it was too late. The jury had heard Wright's own words, clearly revealing his motives. Expert witnesses then took the stand. Dr. Angela Foster, a leading expert on police bias, explained how Wright's actions matched a well-known pattern of officers who use their badge to maintain racial control. A former police chief from another city testified about proper traffic stop procedure and explained how every single action Wright took violated basic police training and constitutional law. He called Wright's behavior the worst example of police misconduct he had seen in 30 years of law enforcement. The city's legal team tried desperately to protect themselves. They argued that Wright was a rogue officer who acted on his own and that the city shouldn't be held responsible. But this strategy backfired badly. Martinez presented evidence proving the city knew about Wright's behavior and failed to stop it. Internal affairs records showed dozens of complaints that were dismissed without real investigation. Supervisors had received reports about Wright's inappropriate comments but did nothing. Even worse, several officers testified that they were discouraged from reporting Wright. Some said they feared punishment from supervisors who protected him because of his high arrest numbers. Martinez also revealed that the city had paid settlements in earlier case involving Wright, but never investigated whether there was a larger pattern. Instead of fixing the problem, the city had been quietly paying to cover up Wright's misconduct while allowing him to continue harming innocent people. During closing arguments, Angelique Martinez delivered a speech so powerful that several jurors were seen wiping away tears. She explained how Wright had turned his badge into a weapon, used it to terrorize law-abiding citizens simply because of their race. She spoke about how his actions represented everything broken about modern policing and why serious financial consequences were necessary to stop this kind of abuse from ever happening again. Wright's attorney followed with a weak appeal, talking about how dangerous police work can be and asking the jury for sympathy. But after weeks of overwhelming evidence showing Wright's repeated abuse of power, the argument had no impact at all. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict. They found Wright liable for violating Judge Taylor's constitutional rights under color of law. They found his supervisor liable for failing to properly train and supervise him. They found the police chief liable for maintaining policies that allowed racial profiling to continue. And they found the city liable for creating and sustaining a culture of discrimination. Then came the moment that stunned the courtroom. The jury awarded Judge Taylor $6 million in damages, $2 million in compensatory damages for pain, suffering, and emotional distress, and $4 million in punitive damages meant to punish the defendants and prevent future misconduct. The courtroom erupted in applause from community members packed into the gallery. Judge Taylor stayed composed, but those who knew her well could see the quiet sense of justice in her eyes. Accountability had finally arrived, but the consequences were only just beginning. The massive verdict sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across the state. Police chiefs immediately began reviewing their own departments, terrified they might have a right of their own. Training programs were rushed into place, and complaint procedures were rewritten almost overnight. For Wright personally, the financial judgment was only the start of his collapse. The FBI's criminal investigation was still active, and federal prosecutors were preparing charges for violating Judge Taylor's civil rights under color of law. If convicted, Wright faced up to 10 years in federal prison. Exactly 6 weeks after the civil verdict, the criminal charges were officially filed. Prosecutors had spent months building their case, and the indictment was devastating. Wright was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Each charge carried serious prison time. Wright's life unraveled almost overnight. His police pension was suspended. His wife filed for divorce, took their 2 children, and moved across the country to live with her parents. Without his salary, Wright couldn't pay the mortgage, and his house went into foreclosure. The media attention was nonstop. Wright's mugshot appeared on every major news outlet. His name became a symbol of police corruption and racial bias. Protesters filled the streets outside the courthouse during his arraignment, demanding maximum punishment. And Wright wasn't alone. His supervisor, Sergeant David Walsh, was also indicted for conspiracy and willful blindness to civil rights violations. Prosecutors showed that Walsh had ignored complaints against Wright and had even encouraged his behavior by reassigning him to certain neighborhoods and giving him positive evaluation. Police Chief Robert Martinez faced federal civil rights charges as well. Investigators revealed that he had received detailed reports about Wright's misconduct but buried them to protect the department's image. Emails showed he was more concerned about bad press than constitutional rights. The federal trial of all three men became a national spectacle. Legal experts called it one of the most important police misconduct cases in decades. Civil rights organizations sent observers every single day. Extra security was required just to manage the crowds and media. As Wright's criminal trial unfolded, even darker details emerged. Prosecutors presented evidence that Wright had planted drugs on at least 3 black suspects to justify arrests. Body camera footage showed him dropping small bags of marijuana during searches and then discovering them moments later. Dr. Jennifer Hassan, a respected psychiatrist, testified that Wright had ruined her professional reputation by arresting her on fake drug charges. She spent $50,000 clearing her name, but the damage was already done. She lost hospital privileges and several high-paying consulting contracts. The prosecution also revealed that Wright had been selling information about upcoming police raids to criminal groups. He warned drug dealers in advance in exchange for cash. What began as racial profiling had evolved into full-scale corruption. Wright's lawyer tried to paint him as a hard-working officer who made mistakes under pressure. That story collapsed when prosecutors played recordings of Wright bragging to fellow officers. In one recording, he openly talked about enjoying the fear on uppity professionals when he put them in handcuffs. A former police informant testified next. He explained how Wright forced him to give false statements against black suspects. Granted immunity for his testimony, the informant described a system where evidence was fabricated and probable cause was manufactured. Expert witnesses explained how Wright's actions violated every principle of constitutional policing. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, a criminology professor, testified that Wright's behavior represented the most dangerous side of police culture, what happens when power goes unchecked. The defense called character witnesses who described Wright as a family man and community volunteer, but their testimony only made things worse. Under cross-examination, several admitted they had never actually seen him work as a police officer. Sergeant Walsh's trial exposed how deeply supervision failures had enabled Wright's actions. Internal affairs investigators testified that Walsh had received detailed complaints but dismissed them without investigation. He even coached Wright on how to write reports that would justify questionable arrests. Prosecutors showed that Walsh had actively participated in the conspiracy. He reassigned Wright to neighborhoods with larger black populations on purpose, specifically to boost arrest numbers, turning discrimination into department policy. Walsh had praised Wright's aggressive style and kept giving him strong performance reviews, even while clear signs of misconduct were piling up. Walsh's lawyer tried to defend him by saying he was just following pressure from higher-ups who demanded more arrests and better statistics. But prosecutors proved Walsh didn't just go along with it. He actively helped Wright's racist and unfair practices continue. Police Chief Martinez faced the most serious accusations because he was the one in charge. Prosecutors argued that Martinez didn't just tolerate racial bias, he helped build a culture where it was rewarded. He promoted officers based on arrest numbers, without caring whether those arrests were legal or whether citizens were filing complaints. The evidence against Martinez was heavy. Emails showed him talking about the need to maintain order in certain neighborhoods using aggressive policing. He repeatedly ignored internal affairs recommendations to discipline Wright and other problem officers. And as Martinez's trial continued, it became clear the corruption wasn't limited to just a few people. Federal investigators discovered that under Martinez's leadership, racial bias training had been removed from the police academy curriculum. Procedures for investigating complaints had been weakened on purpose, making it easier to protect officers from consequences. After hearing everything, the jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on every count against all 3 defendants. Wright was convicted of 8 felony charges tied to civil rights violations, false imprisonment, and corruption. Walsh was convicted of conspiracy and willful blindness. Martinez was convicted of the most serious charges, including leading and maintaining a criminal conspiracy within the department. Sentencing day arrived on a cold December morning, exactly 18 months after Wright first spotted Judge Taylor driving downtown. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity. Overflow rooms were set up with live video feeds because so many people wanted to witness the outcome. Wright was sentenced first. Federal Judge Robert Chen, who had reviewed thousands of pages of evidence and victim statements, delivered a brutal evaluation of Wright's crimes. He called Wright's actions a cancer inside law enforcement and said they had damaged public trust in police across the entire country. Wright was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was ordered to pay restitution to every victim identified in the case. His police certification was permanently revoked and he was banned from ever working in law enforcement again. The moment the sentence was read, Wright's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, and his lawyer had to hold him up as the judge continued reading the punishment term. If Wright served the full sentence, he would be 62 years old when he got out. Next, Sergeant Walsh was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for helping enable Wright's crimes. Judge Chen made it clear that supervisors carry extra responsibility to stop misconduct, and Walsh had failed in the worst way. Walsh also lost his pension and was ordered to pay major restitution to victims. Then came Police Chief Martinez. Martinez received the harshest punishment of all, 12 years in federal prison. Judge Chen explained that leadership roles come with the highest level of responsibility. Martinez's refusal to address known problems had allowed years of civil rights violations that affected hundreds of people. These sentences sent shockwaves through law enforcement across the country. Police chiefs everywhere started rushing to reform complaint systems and bring back strong bias training. The fear of federal prosecution became a serious wake-up call for departments that had been ignoring misconduct. But the fallout didn't stop with those 3 men. The entire police department was placed under federal oversight through a consent decree expected to last at least 10 years. Every policy, training program, and disciplinary process would now require federal monitoring and approval, meaning the department would no longer be able to hide problems behind closed doors. The city was forced to pay another $42 million in settlement to other victims who came forward after the first verdict. These were doctors, lawyers, teachers, business owners, and other professionals, people who had been targeted only because of their race and their success. Judge Taylor didn't stay quiet after winning. She used all the media attention to push for bigger police reform. She even testified before Congress, calling for federal laws to address systemic bias in law enforcement. And the way she spoke calm, clear, and controlled, just like she did during her own trial, made people listen. Her words helped build real momentum for major policy changes. Under federal oversight, the police academy was completely rebuilt. New recruits had to complete serious bias training and community engagement programs. Veteran officers were required to go through retraining too, and those who refused faced termination. Slowly, the department's culture started changing. Problem officers were removed, and they were replaced with professionals who actually understood community-based policing. Wright's old co-workers distanced themselves from him fast. Officers who used to laugh at his inappropriate jokes suddenly claimed they had always been uncomfortable with him. The blue wall of silence that had protected Wright for years started to crack because now federal investigators were watching everything, every report, every decision, every pattern. This case became a landmark example in civil rights law. Law schools started teaching Judge Taylor versus Wright as proof that one officer's misconduct can expose a whole system and cost a city millions. But Wright's crimes didn't just ruin his victims' lives. They destroyed his own family too. His children were harassed at school and eventually had to change their names to escape the stigma. His ex-wife struggled to find work because people connected her to the case. The damage spread far beyond the courthouse and hurt people who never asked for any of it. From his federal prison cell, Wright watched his former department go through a complete transformation. New leadership came in. Policies changed. Training was updated. Accountability became real. The culture Wright had thrived in was torn apart and replaced with actual community policing principles. Then the situation expanded even further. The FBI investigation grew after agents realized Wright wasn't just one bad apple. His behavior fit a larger pattern of civil rights violations across multiple jurisdictions. Federal prosecutors opened investigations in 6 other cities, leading to more indictments and more consent decrees. Judge Taylor returned to the bench with even more credibility and moral authority. After living through police misconduct herself, she had a deeper understanding of how law enforcement and civil rights collide in real life. She began writing powerful legal opinions that strengthened protection for citizens and made it harder for officers to hide behind excuses. The case also sparked new state laws. Legislators passed bills requiring independent investigations into police misconduct complaints and creating civilian oversight boards with real power to discipline officers. Police unions fought these reforms, but after the scandal, they didn't have the public support they once relied on. Community trust in law enforcement, badly damaged by Wright's actions, started to slowly rebuild under new leadership. Town halls, community policing programs, and transparency measures helped close the gap between officers and the communities they were supposed to protect. But for Wright, there was no comeback story. Sitting in prison wearing a federal inmate uniform instead of a badge, he had no redemption waiting for him. He had thrown away his job, his freedom, his family, and his reputation, all for the short-lived satisfaction of humiliating successful black citizens. The power he abused so easily was gone, replaced by the helplessness of incarceration. He appealed his conviction again and again, but every court denied him. Judges found no real evidence of unfair prosecution or excessive sentencing. The proof was too strong, the pattern was too obvious, and the harm to his victims was too severe to justify any reduction. Wright's downfall became required reading at police academies across the country. New recruits studied his case as a warning about how quickly a law enforcement career can collapse when racism and corruption take over. Constitutional policing stopped being just theory and became a survival lesson because in the age of smartphones, recordings, and federal oversight, misconduct doesn't stay hidden forever. Years later, Wright remained locked away, while Judge Taylor continued serving with honor. She turned what happened to her into a force for real change that would protect countless people from going through what she experienced that Tuesday afternoon. And that intersection where Wright first saw Judge Taylor driving became a symbol of how one choice can change everything. To him, pulling her over probably felt like routine harassment, just another person to intimidate. Instead, it became the beginning of the end for his entire life. Wright's decision to pull Judge Taylor over cost him everything. His 15-year prison sentence, his broken family, his lost pension, his ruined name. All of it started with one moment when he decided a successful black woman needed to be put in her place. He had used his badge like a weapon for years, terrorizing innocent people while his department looked away. But Judge Taylor's $6 million victory sent a loud message. Accountability will catch up to officers who abuse their power. Her courage exposed a rotten system and changed how police misconduct gets investigated and prosecuted nationwide. Wright learned the hard way that racism has consequences some people can't afford. Those blue lights in Judge Taylor's rearview mirror didn't just mean a traffic stop. They marked the beginning of the end for a corrupt cop who thought he was untouchable. Justice was served. But rebuilding trust between communities and law enforcement is work that continues every single day. This case was intense, but the case on the right side is even more insane.